I stared at the mirror and didn't move. Not because I was tired, not because I was distracted, because something behind me just moved. I saw it in the reflection. A shift. A shadow. Something that wasn't supposed to be there. My apartment was empty. I lived alone. I had locked the door myself 20 minutes ago. But in the glass, just over my left shoulder, something had moved. I spun around. Nothing. Just my bedroom wall. The dark window. The same old lamp I'd had since college. I turned back to the mirror slowly, my heart already doing something strange in my chest, and what I saw in my own face scared me more than anything else. Because I looked like I already knew something was wrong, long before that moment. Long before that night. Like some part of me had been waiting. And it had. I just didn't know it yet. My name is Clara. I'm 31 years old. And up until 8 months ago, I would have described myself as someone who had finally figured out how to be okay. Not happy, not thriving, just okay. That's a harder thing to achieve than people think. I grew up in a house where silence meant something was wrong, where my mother's mood could change the temperature of a room, where I learned very young to read people, to watch faces, to notice the small things that everyone else seemed to miss. I thought that made me careful. I thought that made me smart. What it actually made me was tired. By the time I was 25, I had a long history of relationships with people who needed fixing, jobs I stayed at too long out of guilt, and a therapist named Dr. Rains who once told me, very gently, that I had confused being needed with being loved. I cried for 45 minutes after that session. Then I went home and thought about it for 3 years. When I moved to Portland at 28, I made myself a quiet promise. I was going to stop rescuing, stop shrinking, stop pretending I was fine when I wasn't. I found a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old wood and someone else's coffee. I found a job at a nonprofit that worked with housing insecure families. I found a routine. I also found Daniel. I know, but the story isn't a simple one, and Daniel isn't a simple villain. That's what makes everything so much harder to explain. He wasn't cruel in obvious ways. He wasn't loud or threatening. He was warm. He remembered small things. He showed up. And for someone who had spent a lifetime around people who disappeared, that felt like something close to a miracle. We dated for 2 years. We moved in together after 18 months. And for a long while, things were genuinely good. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how slowly things changed. So slowly I almost didn't notice. So slowly that by the time I did, I had already stopped trusting myself entirely. It started with the mirror. Not the night I saw the shadow. Earlier than that. Months earlier. We had this full-length mirror in the bedroom propped against the wall across from the bed. I had brought it from my old place. I liked it. I used it every morning to check how I looked before work, and every night it just sat there quietly in the corner, doing what mirrors do. But around 6 months into us living together, Daniel started making comments. Small ones. Easy to dismiss. "You've been staring at yourself a lot lately, don't you think?" said with a smile, said lightly. But said, "I don't know, it's just a habit," I told him. "I've always done it." "Sure," he said, and left the room. The next week he said something else. He said I seemed distracted lately, that I seemed somewhere else. He said it with concern in his voice, the kind of concern that sounds like love but lands like an accusation. I started noticing myself in the mirror differently after that, not with confidence, with question marks. Do I look tired? Do I look strange? What does he see when he looks at me? And then one night I was standing in front of that mirror before bed, just brushing my hair, and Daniel came up behind me and put his hands on my shoulders and looked at our reflection together. "We look good," he said. But the way he said it, the way his eyes moved across my face in the glass, it didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like an assessment. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself I was looking for problems because good things made me anxious. I told myself this was exactly the kind of self-sabotage Dr. Rains had warned me about, so I stayed quiet. And I watched myself disappear a little more each week. By month 3 of living together, I had stopped wearing the red coat I loved. By month 4, I had canceled dinner with my closest friend Simone twice because Daniel mentioned he thought she was a bad influence, that she encouraged me to drink too much and stay out too late. I didn't drink much. I was usually home by 10. But I heard the comment and I felt the weight of it and I canceled the dinner. Simone called me and said, "Clara, what's happening with you?" "I'm fine," I said, "just busy." She paused long enough that I felt it. "Okay," she said, "but I'm here. Whenever you're ready." I didn't call her back for 6 weeks. By month 5, I had started second-guessing everything I said before I said it. Running it through a filter? Is this going to start something? Is he going to misread this? Should I even say it at all? That is a very exhausting way to live. And still I stayed. Because he was kind sometimes. Because he brought me tea when I was sick. Because he cried once when he talked about his father and I held him, and in that moment he felt so human and real and broken in ways I understood. I was good at loving broken things. But something shifted in October. Something small. Something that shouldn't have mattered. But it did. I came home late one Tuesday. Over time, a family we were working with had a crisis, and I stayed until it was handled. I was exhausted and a little proud of myself, and I wanted a hot shower and maybe to talk about it with someone. Daniel was in the living room when I walked in. He didn't look up. "Hey," I said. "Sorry I'm late, it was a whole thing at work." "I figured," he said. "That was it. Nothing else." I stood there for a second in my coat, still holding my keys, waiting for a follow-up question. "How was it? What happened? Are you okay?" Nothing came. "Do you want to hear about it?" I asked. He looked at me then. And something crossed his face that I had never quite seen before. Not anger. Not coldness. Something that looked almost like impatience. "Clara, I've had my own hard day," he said. "Can we not make everything about you?" I didn't say anything. I went to the shower. I stood under the water for longer than necessary and told myself it was fine. People had bad days. He was allowed to be tired. I was too sensitive. But the words stayed with me. "Can we not make everything about you?" I replayed that sentence for a long time. And then I started watching him differently. The way you watch someone when you've stopped taking their behavior at face value. When you start collecting data points instead of excuses. What I found wasn't what I expected. It was a Thursday night, about 2 weeks after the comment. I was in bed reading and Daniel was in the bathroom. I could hear water running. I glanced up at the mirror across the room and caught my own reflection. I looked at myself for a long moment, not with vanity, with searching. Who is that person, I thought? What happened to her? And then the water turned off. And the bathroom door opened. And Daniel walked out, and I watched him in the mirror before he saw me watching, before he arranged his face into something softer. That fraction of a second. That unguarded moment. His expression was not the expression of someone who had been washing their face. It was the expression of someone thinking very hard about something, calculating, working through something. And when his eyes landed on me in the mirror, on my reflection watching him, something shifted in his face fast. Too fast. "You're still up," he said. "Yeah," I said. "Good book." He smiled and climbed into bed and I went back to the page, but I wasn't reading anymore. I was thinking. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 nights later. I woke up at 2 a.m. and the bed was empty beside me. I lay still for a moment listening. No sound from the bathroom. No movement in the apartment. I got up quietly and checked the living room. Empty. The kitchen. Empty. The front door was locked from the inside. I stood in the hallway and noticed a thin line of light under the door of what we called the second bedroom, the room we used for storage. A room I hadn't been in for weeks because it was full of his things. Boxes he'd never unpacked. Old equipment from a photography hobby he said he'd given up. I stood at that door for a long time. I knocked softly. Silence. Then movement. Then the light went off. Then Daniel opened the door and stood in the dark doorway and said very calmly, "Couldn't sleep, didn't want to wake you." "What were you doing?" I asked. "Just going through some old stuff," he said. He went back to bed. I followed. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and something cold settled in my chest that didn't leave. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I went to that room. The door was locked. He had never locked that door before. I didn't confront him. Not then. That's the thing about growing up in a house where conflict felt dangerous. You learn to move around things instead of through them. You learn to gather information quietly and wait. So I waited. But I also called Simone. "I need to talk," I said. "I know," she said. "Come over." I sat in her kitchen for 3 hours and talked and cried and talked some more. I told her everything. The mirror comments, the canceled dinners, the Tuesday night dismissal, the locked room. Simone listened the way only a person who truly loves you can listen, with her whole body still and her eyes completely present. When I finished, she said, "Clara, I want to show you something." She opened her laptop and turned it toward me. It was a forum, a support forum for people who had been in psychologically controlling relationships. "I found it 6 weeks ago," she said, "when you canceled on me the second time. I've been reading it since then." She pointed to a thread. The title was, "Does anyone else feel like they're disappearing?" I read the first 3 posts. And then I started crying again, because every single word felt like it had been written about me. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Simone said next. "There's something else," she said carefully. "And I need you to not get upset with me for telling you." My stomach dropped. "I ran into someone," she said. "Someone who knows Daniel. From before he moved here." She paused. She was choosing words very carefully. "Her name is Mara. She dated him for 2 years in Seattle. She left about 6 months before he moved to Portland." I waited. "She told me things, Clara. About the way he operates, about how it starts. The small comments. The isolation. The room." I went very still. "What do you mean, the room?" I said. Simone looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity. It was stronger than that. More protective. She said he kept her room locked, that she never found out what was in it until the night she left. She said when she finally got inside, she found recordings, audio recordings, of their conversations, of her on the phone with her family, of her crying. The apartment around me went very quiet. He was building a profile of her, Simone said. Learning what she feared, what she needed, using it. I didn't speak for a long time. Outside the window, Portland moved on normally. Cars passed. Someone laughed on the street. The world continued being the world. And I sat there realizing that the person I had trusted with my most vulnerable parts had been studying me like a subject, that every soft thing I had ever told him had been filed away, used, turned into a tool. I thought about every conversation in that apartment, every late-night confession, every moment I had cried and felt held and thought, finally someone sees me. And something inside me went from cold to something else entirely. Fury. I went home that night with a plan. I needed to know what was in that room. Daniel was at work until 7. I had 3 hours. The lock was a simple interior lock, the kind with a small hole in the center of the knob. It takes a thin, straight object and about 4 seconds if you know what you're doing. My mother used to lock me out of rooms when she was angry, so I had learned early. The door opened. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just breathing. Then I turned on the light. The room was neater than I expected. Not the chaos of someone hiding something in a hurry. Organized, deliberate. There was a folding table against the wall with a laptop on it, and beside the laptop, a small digital recorder, and beside the recorder, a notebook. I opened the notebook. It was not what I expected. It was organized like a study, like a field journal, with dates, and names, and notes. Very specific notes. My name was on page 12. The notes under my name went back to the second week we met. Things I had said to him casually, mentions of my childhood, my fears, my boundaries. Small things I had told him that I had already forgotten telling him, laid out with a clinical precision that made my skin feel wrong on my body. I took photos of every page. Then I turned on the laptop. It was password protected. I tried his birthday. Nothing. I tried his mother's name. Nothing. I tried a phrase he used often, something he said when things were difficult. A private phrase I had only ever heard him use with me. The laptop opened, and I wish it hadn't. There were audio files. Dozens. Organized by date. There were folders, with my name, with Mara's name, with 2 other names I didn't recognize. I plugged in my earbuds with shaking hands and clicked the most recent file. It was a recording from 9 days ago. From inside our bedroom. At night. It was me. Talking in my sleep. I do that sometimes. I had told him that. I had said it as a small embarrassing confession one night, when he mentioned hearing me murmur something. I thought it was sweet that he told me. I thought it was intimacy. It was documentation. There were other files. Calls I had made from the living room. A conversation I had with my sister at the kitchen table while he was supposedly in the bedroom. A night I had cried alone in the bathroom after a particularly bad argument, thinking I was unheard. He had heard everything. More than heard. He had filed it, dated it, kept it. I sat on the floor of that room for I don't know how long. Then I stood up. I locked the door behind me from the outside the way it had been. I put everything back exactly as it was. I turned off the light. And I called a number I'd found while sitting in Simone's kitchen. A number for a legal advocate who specialized in exactly this kind of situation. Her name was Patricia. She picked up on the second ring. "I think I need help," I said. "You called the right place," she said. "Tell me everything." Patricia moved fast. Faster than I expected. Faster than I was ready for. Within 48 hours, I had a documented record of the recordings, photographed evidence, and the conversation with a detective named Walsh who told me that what Daniel had done was not just emotionally wrong. In Oregon, recording someone without their consent is a crime. I moved through those 2 days in a kind of suspended state. Calm in a way that scared me. Doing the next thing. And the next thing. And the next. Simone took time off work and stayed with me. She slept on the couch. She made food I didn't eat and sat with me while I didn't eat it. On the evening of the second day, Daniel came home and I was sitting at the kitchen table waiting. He saw my face and something shifted in his immediately. He was good at reading people too. We had that in common. "Clara," he said carefully. "Sit down," I said. He sat. I placed my phone on the table between us. On the screen was a photograph of the notebook page with my name on it. He looked at it. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, he said, "You went in that room." "Yes," I said. "That was private," he said. "That was private," he said. And his voice had shifted. The warmth was gone. Underneath it was something I had never heard directly before. I had only seen it in that mirror, in that unguarded fraction of a second. Something cold and calculating and completely unbothered. "You recorded me," I said. "Without my knowledge, for months." "I was protecting myself," he said. "From what?" I asked. "From exactly this," he said. "From you misrepresenting things. From you twisting the story." I stared at him. "You were watching me and documenting me and isolating me from my friends," I said. "And you thought the danger was me?" "You're very good at playing the victim," he said. He said it so smoothly, so effortlessly, like a line he had rehearsed or used before. I thought about Mara. I thought about the 2 other names in those folders. I wondered if they had sat across a table from him and heard the exact same line delivered in the exact same tone. "You should know," I said, "that I've already spoken to a detective and an advocate, and I have copies of everything." For the first time since he sat down, something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, fear. Clara, you should also know, I said, that Simone is in the next room. And Patricia, my legal advocate, knows exactly where I am and who I'm with. He was quiet. I want you to leave tonight, I said. I want your things gone within the week. And I want you to understand that if you contact me, if you come near me, if you contact anyone I know to shape this story, I will use everything I have. He stood up slowly. He looked at me for a long moment. And then he did something I didn't expect. He nodded. Just once. Like I had passed some kind of test he had been administering. Like this was always going to be the outcome and he was simply acknowledging it. And then he walked to the bedroom, packed a bag, and left. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been in months. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Simone came out from a hallway and sat across from me, and we didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. I feel like I can breathe, I said. And also like I need to learn how to breathe again. She reached across the table and took my hand. The legal process took several months. Daniel did not contest things quietly. He tried, through mutual acquaintances, to build a narrative. But Patricia was sharp and prepared and had worked with cases like this before. The recorded evidence of his illegal surveillance spoke in ways that his carefully constructed charm couldn't counter. He eventually entered into an agreement. Formal legal acknowledgement. Restrictions. I don't know where he is now. I don't want to. What I do know is what happened the week after he left. I stood in front of that mirror, the same one, in the same spot, on a Tuesday morning before work. And I looked at myself for a long time. Not with fear. Not with question marks. Not searching for what someone else saw when they looked at me. I looked at myself the way you look at someone you've been worried about. With relief. With the kind of love that comes from going through something hard together. She's still here, I thought. She made it. I thought about that night months earlier, the shadow in the mirror, the movement I had seen just over my shoulder, the thing that had made me spin around and find nothing. I think about it differently now. I don't think what I saw was a threat. I think what I saw was my own awareness, the part of me that had been watching and collecting and waiting, the part that knew long before I let myself know, the instinct that had been sounding quiet alarms for months, that I had spent so long explaining away and dismissing and silencing. It was me. It was always me. Trying to tell myself the truth. I called Dr. Rains and started going back to therapy. I called my sister and we talked for 2 hours, and I cried, and she said things that were so kind they hurt in the best way. I called my mother, which was harder, but important. I put on the red coat. I went to dinner with Simone and we stayed out until midnight, and I had 2 glasses of wine and laughed until my chest hurt, and none of it was a problem and no one was keeping score. I started noticing the way sunlight came through my apartment windows in the morning. How the old wood smell had started to feel like mine. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things you stop noticing when you're living in survival mode. The kind of things that come back slowly, like feeling returning to a numb limb. Pins and needles and then warmth. Here is what I know now that I didn't know before. Control doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it looks like attentiveness. Sometimes it looks like concern. Sometimes it sits across from you at dinner and remembers your favorite order and asks about your day with its eyes doing something slightly different from its mouth. The thing that saves you is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a Tuesday night, standing in front of a mirror, noticing a shift in the glass and deciding not to explain it away. Sometimes it's calling the friend you've been avoiding. Sometimes it's saying, "I need to talk," instead of, "I'm fine." The instincts that I spent years second-guessing, the ones I had learned to dismiss as too sensitive, too dramatic, too much, those instincts were not wrong. They were never wrong. They were trying to protect me the whole time, and the bravest thing I ever did was finally listen. I still have that mirror. I thought about getting rid of it. I thought it would feel cleaner, a fresh start, nothing to carry forward. But I kept it. Because every morning when I stand in front of it, I see someone who looked into the glass at the scariest moment of her life and didn't look away. And that person deserves to be seen.